number one, like just changing expectations. In my class, it's like, what is a barrier to you going in and doing a search? And not having that expectation, that's a big thing. So as fire chiefs, as ops chief, I can say there will be a primary search done in the first 10 minutes of every structure fire, period. And if there's not, the battalion chief will be in my office explaining why. Now, there can be reasons why, but a lot of people are just motivated. They don't want to be in the chief's office. So simply by saying that, we change expectation.
Breathing in diesel exhaust fumes is like walking into a fire without a mask. Over time, that exposure leads to cancer. Protect yourself with MagnaGrip. To learn more, visit magnagrip.com.
All right, so good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on wherever and whenever you're listening. I will once again always start with gratitude for you tuning in to the Perspective on Leadership podcast brought to you by Fire Engineering. My name is Steve Shaw. Very proud to be the Deputy Fire Chief for the new Town of Jupiter Fire Rescue Department, just after recently retiring for just shy of 25 years from Fort Lauderdale Fire Rescue. I'm honored to be part of the Fire Engineering family as an author, presenter at FDIC, and a host for this podcast. I say it every time. You all have your choice of which podcast you listen to, which you can digest. And the fact that you're listening to this one, I am truly honored. I will always do my best to make sure I do right by the listener. Years ago, Chief Halton, I always mention this, but Chief Halton told me years ago that FDIC, fire engineering, is all based on tactics. FDIC is a tactics conference. And no matter what we did or taught or spoke or presented on, we always should be focused on the tactical ways that things that we talk about could be deployed in the real world. So in his honor, I will always keep that in the forefront of these conversations. Perspective is my passion. It is my personal journey as a student of leadership to kind of take that and push it as far as I can. I'm always fascinated by how our perspectives affect our ability to lead. The goal is the same as it's been since day one, to take a concept or a trait we associate with leadership and take that deep dive down that rabbit hole. There are so many amazing leaders within our fire service and without, and my goal here is to have them on, pick their brain, and let them just pour all that information out so we can all take something from it. So thanks to Diane Rothschild, thanks to David Rhodes, and thanks to the Clarion team, and especially thanks to my agency, Jupiter Fire Rescue, and my fire chief, Chief Donato, for allowing me to continue to have this platform so I can continue to do right by our brothers and sisters in the fire service. So in April of 2023, Editor-in-Chief David Rhodes reminded us all through his editor's comment that we go to fires to search. And when he made that comment, it had me reflecting on my time in Fort Lauderdale and my experience during that time during search, like civilian rescues and search. And during my tenure in Fort Lauderdale, I had been involved with 2 successful civilian rescues. Interestingly enough, when I think about them both of those civilians were found by the team after the primary search had been completed. And I often think, why was that? And I often go down the rabbit hole with this, like what was being done, what was not being done, was my search enough, so on and so forth, and we could take that down all day and go through that. But regardless, it had me thinking about, where am I with search? More recently, I connected with Grant Schwalbe, and we were discussing what he was doing at this training site over where he works on the west coast of Florida. And that also got us into the conversation of search, his FDIC classes. And I figured this was kind of like one of those moments where everything's kind of focusing together. And this is a good time to not only talk about this, but bring him on and just take that dive down into search, what that looks like today and all that jazz. So that's kind of what we are going to be doing today, is talking about search, not only in terms of the tactical side, but where we as leaders in the fire service need to be thinking about that topic in 2024. So there were 3 things that I was thinking about as I was preparing for this podcast. The first thing is this idea of search culture. And I've been doing a ton of research for my EFO paper on culture and the fire service and what defines culture. And of all those definitions, I gravitate to the one that has to do with the attitudes and behavior characteristics of a particular social group. And I think about that. And I ask the listener to think about, through this podcast and afterwards, what's your search culture? When you are assigned search, when you think about search, when you're training on search, where does your culture lie? The second thing I was thinking about is, what does search and rescue training, what does search training look like in the year 2024? Do our fire academies reflect the data? Are they preparing our firefighters with solid know-how? Have been people, if you've been following this podcast, you're aware that I've taken on a new role as deputy fire chief for a new organization. And part of what we're doing is creating that content, but also the standards and the culture within the organization. So I think about this a lot. And the third thing I was thinking about is, are people aware of the various research that's been done through the years, especially recently, all having to do with search, whether it's the Firefighter Rescue Survey, Project Mayday, the Close Your Door campaign, any of the various trainings done by UL, NIST, FSRI, whatever. And if not, why? Are they not akin to that? Anyway, so today I'm going to be introducing Grant Schwalbe, and we're going to dive deep into this concept. So before I let him introduce himself, Grant has been a firefighter since 1995, where he started in Northwest Ohio. He spent 17 years as a lieutenant on Engine 43, and now is currently the Division Chief of Operations for Estero Fire Rescue. Grant has taught at a variety of conferences, including FDIC, the Orlando Fire Conference, Wichita Hot, Fort Lauderdale Fire Expo, and the Firemanship Conference. He's a lead instructor for the FDIC HOT program, Residential Search, Making the Grab. And he has taught for When Things Go Bad and hosts the Grabs and the Journeyman Firefighter podcast. Grant has an AS in fire science and a bachelor's degree in business administration, and he's married to Katie and has 2 daughters. So Grant, as we start this conversation, man, thank you for taking the time to spend with me and diving into this topic, man.
Well, thanks for asking me.
So let's start with this, man. Walk me through, I guess, as far back as you want to go in terms of your journey to where you are today, but specifically, why search? Like, why is that something that you're passionate about and all the things that are out there? What's that journey look like?
I started as a volunteer at a part-time department just outside of Toledo, and you did the 36-hour basic volunteer training, and then I got hired on full time and ended up doing the firefighter 1 and 2 through the state through Ohio Fire Academy. And what I found was, I think all the listeners can probably say everybody's done a search, been assigned a search, and they've done some sort of search. But I keep coming back to, like, nobody ever taught me how to do a good search, because what I was being taught in the books never looked like anything that I did. Now, whether I just couldn't follow directions or that wasn't what industry standard was doing, I felt like there was such a disconnect. I remember early on, we had a fire in 1995. This was one of those kind of hallmark moments. Fire in 1995. I was on the second arriving rig, and it was kind of a nothing fire, like fire through the roof, but it was kind of bread and butter. But we got about 20 minutes in, and we were just going on our second bottle to go inside, and we found a 24-year-old laying on the floor. And I was like, man, why didn't we find him? And now everything was, I wouldn't say working against us. Like, the family or neighbors said nobody was inside. The family moved out of town. There's a for sale sign in the front yard, which is like clue number 2. You go inside and there's no furniture, which is clue number 3. But this was like a split level house, and the family had moved, and he hadn't, he hung out and was staying just a few more days to hang out with his friends. So, I don't know if a search early on would have made a difference, but it wasn't all burned up or anything. And I was like, man, we kind of failed. And at the time, my main job, I was servicing fire extinguishers. And I'll tell you, every time I walked into a dark room, I saw that body. And that went on for about 6 months, and it just kind of bugged me. But as time passes, so do those memories, and you just move on. And it was several years later, we were going to a fire, and we were told that people were inside, and it was old folks efficiency, the typical, a small 1-bedroom apartment where you went on medicals 3-4 times a shift. And then we were told, like, hey, there's people inside. And, bi-directional flow, little smoke coming out. It's a small apartment. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to find this person. And I get in and we start doing the search. And immediately what was going through my head was, oh my gosh, I have no plan to get this person out. I hadn't been taught about drags. And, I joke in class that, my brain went back to IF's the 3rd edition, where you've got firefighters that are bringing out a victim on a chair. And then you've got firefighters that are doing a blanket drag. And then you got firefighters where 3 firefighters are standing with their arms out and there's a victim across. And in my head, like, that's not going to work. No, that's not going to work. no, that's not going to work. And I feel like how we work as human beings is I did not want to find a victim and fail getting them out. It's what we're supposed to do. We go in and we get everybody out. But from that moment on, and there wasn't anybody inside. Thank the Lord. But and I'm sure we would have figured out a way to get them out. But I'm like, man, there's a gap in my training. And growing up outside of Toledo, I was taking classes at the community college, and Skip Coleman, who's like OG oriented search. He was one of my mentors and instructors, and just hearing the way he explained it, I thought, man, we really got to do better with how we're doing searches. And so that just kind of put me on a journey that, man, I just reached out to everybody I knew, and I'm like, how are you doing it? How are you doing it? And nobody was doing it like they were in the book. And so, that kind of set me down the path that we got to do a little bit better.
I got you. No, that you said a lot there, and I think the most impactful statement you said right there was kind of something that was going through my mind, is that nobody taught you how to do a search, and that's profound. Like, I think back to my time at Fort Lauderdale, and we're an aggressive. Fort Lauderdale is an aggressive fire department. We are a very aggressive fire department. Have a lot of bread and butter fires, and we are just, when it comes to pulling that line, knocking down the fire, all that stuff, we're good at it. And I'm glad I had that experience over there. And again, reflecting on the search part, I was mentioning before how I think back to those two situations where I had those two, or I was involved with a team that had those two civilian rescues. And why didn't we get them on the first? Why didn't we get them on the initial the assignment? Why did it have to wait to the second, the secondary search? Kind of like what you were saying. And I struggle with that. And it's good now, in terms of like the knowledge base, but it's even then, I still think, why, what happened there? So, and I think that it reminded me, like, for example, the first time I had a grab, and I think that I was watching maybe one of your previous podcasts or something on fire engineering, but it was either you or somebody else, but a statement was made that I wasn't expecting a victim. And I remember the first time I had a grab, I wasn't expecting a victim, but we had one. And I remember going, holy crap, what? And I didn't have a plan. So what we did was we brought this victim out to the other side of the house. This happened to be a second floor apartment complex. So we brought him onto the balcony, which happened to be screened in on the second floor. So we got him out of the apartment, but now we're on the second floor. No ladders, no screened in apartment. I got to break out screens or bring him back to the apartment, but there was no plan in my head. And it goes back to mindset. And I'm glad we're having this conversation, because after that, my mind changed. Like, I'm going to find somebody. And when I do, here's my plan. But until that time, I didn't have a plan. It was more like, it was very defensive instead of offensive in terms of finding that victim.
You're not alone in that. We've recorded over 130 grabs episodes, and just, we were at Firemanship and we did 6 of them. And I would say over half, same thing. I didn't expect a victim. I found one and was like, oh crap, it's actually somebody. And we need to change that mindset. I mean, I think once, we all got on the job and we thought, hey, you're going to get a civilian rescue. If it's like hitting the lottery, it just doesn't happen that often. And, through the work that Brian Brush is doing, there's 10 rescues a day. Like every 2.5 hours, somebody's being pulled out, which is grossly underreported. We need to expect we're going to find them. And in the end, we got to just get inside. We're not looking for Easter eggs. We're looking for human beings. So we got to get inside, and we should expect every time. So how do we change that mindset? Number one, we say you're going to find them. Number two, you dress your dummies to look like you're freaking kids. I think Brian Abbott does a great job making he makes dummies and dresses them up in his kids' clothes. That way, when you see a foot, you're not looking for Rescue Annie or something. You're actually, a foot. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And so it's just a couple of the things we can do to change from that freak out factor.
Man, yeah, no, I'm glad we're talking about this, man, because if the listeners out there thinking the same thing, they're not alone. Even experienced operators may find themselves in that situation. But I'm glad we're having this conversation, so when people are listening, they can check themselves and go, what's my culture? When I'm going to a fire, am I saying, I probably won't find one, or when I do, then ... So let's talk about FDIC for a second. I know that at FDIC, you were doing the hands-on class followed by your lecture. So I'm curious not only how the class went, But I'm really curious to hear kind of the experiences you have with those students. In other words, when there's students coming in to learn search or to practice search or to go over search, and when there's in front of you in the lecture, what are you hearing that's a trend out there? Are people walking with training scars that shouldn't be there these days? What are some things you're seeing out there when these cats come to your class?
I think overwhelming, they just don't have a system set up in place. And I'm very much a systems person. You couple that with everybody has done a search. So they have some basis for it. Whereas you take a RIT class, I've never rescued a firefighter. So anything that I'm going to be told is brand new information. So you start filtering the information that the instructors are giving you with what your own experiences are. And I think, really right out the gate, we try to tell people, hey, we're not teaching you anything you haven't heard before. And we're not probably teaching you anything you haven't thought before. We're just telling you we're going to put it into a system. So just like you said, if this, then that, if this, then that, so that we have a system to play from. And it's okay to say you search with your hands, not with a tool, because that's what 90% of the fire service does. And you can stand up in front of a fire chief and say, Chief, I don't search with the tool. I leave it at the door. And know that we're going to back you as a fire service, because that is best practice, right? But we shy back because we get recliner snipers, and you want to give the book answer because somebody's going to, well, why don't you do right or left hand from the front door? I was like, so we really just try to break it down into a system that they understand. That's the biggest thing.
Do you see any differences between, let's say, the large departments or the smaller departments, or any big difference between those kind of things, like the ones that have more personnel to throw to fire versus the ones that are, let's say, staffing limited or anything like that?
We do, and I think we break it down pretty simply, because they'll say, hey, we can't do stuff like New York, or we can't do stuff like Wichita, or we can't do stuff like, Estero does. And we simply say, what do you get on a first arriving structure fire? Like, what's your alarm assignment? How many people are you responding with the rig? So we kind of run through that. It's like, who responds with 2? Who responds with 3? Who responds with 4 on the rig? And then what's the time delay between first and second due? Now, we understand that can vary based on where you're at in your district. But for the most part, in my district, I'm going to have 3 or 4 rigs arrive within 2 minutes of each other. So that's the game that we're going to play. And then we say, all right, if this, then that. So if I only have 2 people that are going to go in and do the search, what kind of search are they going to do? And it's like, we're going to do an oriented or a split search. So we can jump down and talk about what an oriented or split search looks like. And say, all right, I got a 4-man rig. I'm going to split 2 and 2. 2 go in and do the oriented or split. What do the other 2 do? We're like, all right, we're going to do a VES. Like, all right, who's allowed to do a VES on their department? Like, everybody raises their hand and is like, all right, who, if they did a VES on their department, their chiefs would probably lose their crap. And, half the hands go back up. And it's because we don't have a system. It's not a cowboy thing. It's like, in my department, they know if we're going to go split 2 and 2, 2 are going to go inside, 2 are going to do VES. If there's a known victim location, they're going to use VES. If they're cut off from fire and they can't enter the front door, they're going to use VES as a means to enter the building. And before we go defensive, if we can't search the whole structure, I expect crews to go around from the outside and check off rooms as they can. But if they have that system, now it's not some big scary cowboy thing. And then the third thing that we hit in our class is we say the engine-based search. We're not teaching people to go search with a hose line, because that you can't do 2 things at once. And you look at the Aocook, Iowa case study. We need to take care of the fire problem, but search can't be delayed until the second due rig arrives 20 minutes later. So you have to have a plan to say, if this, let's go stretch the line to the fire. The guy on the line needs to know how to man the line by himself. What does the officer do? Search back, shut some doors, and we stay in voice, visual, or touch contact. But without putting things into a system, I think it's really tough to just expect guys to function well on the fireground.
Breathing in diesel exhaust fumes is like walking into a fire without a mask. Over time, that exposure leads to cancer. Protect yourself with MagnaGrip. To learn more, visit magnagrip.com.
So a little further on that, do you find, and I'm thinking back to when I was in training in Fort Lauderdale, we had the advantage of having a pretty long training program, upwards of 10 weeks. And we would reinforce things that may not have been taught at the academies, let's say, as well as they could have. Do you see there's a disconnect between and you're in Florida like me, so you probably have a little bit more, I guess, a viewpoint on this like I do here, at least in the state level, but do you see that there's significant gaps between what's being taught for minimum standards and by the time they get on our job?
Oh, 100%. Minimum standard is simply what they're reading in essentials, or, fire engineering's got a good firefighter 1 and 2 book, but, the other ones I feel like are kind of garbage, in that it's like right or left hand, and they're teaching you to hold on to your partner, you're swinging a tool. It's all things that we're not doing. But you need to test out on that. You need to take your state test, and then we tell you to forget everything, and we're going to teach you the real way, which I think is it's horrible. So just like you guys, I mean, we're between 6 and 8 weeks when we bring somebody on, and we teach them what we expect. Forget everything learned up to this point, which is sad when they invest 16 weeks of their life and their money to do some training. But for a while, we got some really jam up guys that were trying to get into, that were working in the fire academy. We were trying to change the way we were teaching, and in the end, we just found it was too big of a fight, that we'd rather spend our time teaching our people once we hired them, rather than try to fix everybody in recruit school.
Yeah, and that makes sense. You mentioned VES before, and I can remember years ago when we first started incorporating VES to our protocols. It was a struggle in the beginning, man. I mean, you had a lot of people that above us just didn't understand what it meant, why we were doing it, so on and so forth. And as we tried to explain it, we had people above us saying, well, just make sure when you do that, just go in with the hose line and go in with this. I'm like, well, hold on. It doesn't work that way. But it was nice. I mean, I remember the first time I was really exposed to VES was actually, I think the Orlando guys came down to do the Fort Lauderdale Fire Conference. In Orlando, they had a really strong truck culture. They have a really strong truck culture, and they were really good at VES. I'm like, where did that come from? And somebody was explaining it to me that years ago, one of their current chiefs, who was a firefighter back in the day, had actually made a save using VES, and because of that, it was kind of made it accepted with the department. But for us, it was a tough push, man. So I guess my point with that is it was really nice to see some of the data coming out of the Firefighter Rescue Survey, and among other things, that was really validating things like VES. Because I'm a data guy. I like seeing data, metrics, all that kind of jazz. And when it reinforces some of the tactics you've been trying to preach and trying to practice, it's a good feeling, man. So I'm happy with all the data stuff that's going on there, that kind of stuff,
Yeah, sometimes we put on Larry McCormick says this all the time, we put on our fireman costume and we get stupid. Just this week, I saw on Facebook, 4 guys ended up doing a VES, 4 civilians did a VES rescue. Yet we got chiefs that tell us, we're going to train you, we're going to give you all this protective gear, breathing apparatus, but it's too dangerous for you to go and do a VES. These 4 dudes just did it in street clothes. It's like, man, what are we doing? The cops can do it. The cops can do it before we get there, but once we get there, forget it.
Right. So you mentioned it before, the Grabs podcast. So, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I listen to a bunch of the ones from the Grabs, and I like your format. I dig the Grabs podcast. I want to ask you about that in for a second, but I really like that, one, they're typically relatively short in nature, and 2, you have guys that have actually done some sort of grab, but then they tell it in a story base. So as you're listening to it, you're seeing it through their eyes. And I think that's a powerful way to deliver the information. It's real. It's highlighting something that was done. It's a positive thing. But where did that come from? And what have you learned by doing that podcast?
Truthfully, in doing research for my classes, because if I only teach what I experience in the fire calls that I go on, my scope is going to be small, right? So anytime that I'd hear of somebody getting a grab, I try to reach out to them and say, hey, tell me how this went, because their experience might be different than mine. And, technology kind of came along at that time. So I was calling a lot of people and trying to get information for my classes. And I was thinking, why do they need to hear a filtered story through me? And I can't tell a story for crap. But if I can just record it, let them tell the story. So I reached out to Justin McWilliams. We had worked together during the initial initial class at FDIC, and I know he was doing some firefighter rescue survey stuff. And I'm like, hey, what do you think about doing this? And let's really try to bring firefighter rescue survey to life, because some people are data driven, some people are story. So we just found something simple. We just record on Zoom, and we want to hear what the department's search culture is, so they have a background. Because you hear somebody's grab and they may be from a rural department. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So we need a little bit of background, and then we want to hear the story, and then we want to hear what the aftermath of the story was. Like, did this increase your search culture? Did this reinforce it? Did this totally blow it up? And so we try to just keep it real short. The funny side to all that is when we do the interviews, it's the first time we've heard the story, because some people will reach out and like, they're like, hey, I want to know if this is good. Like, I don't want to hear it. Like, every story about a grab is good. I'm sure there's something to be learned. And I want to hear it for the first time when the listeners hear it. That way my brain goes where they go, rather than have anything be too scripted. And we really want it just like a kitchen table. You were coming in the shift before you got a grab. Hey, tell me what happened. That's what we were looking for.
Man, I dig that. And like I said, I love the idea of mixing the storytelling aspect of things. Not even a story. It's not a story. I'm saying that wrong. Just the real-time accounting of an incident. And when I was listening to one today, the most recent one, and as the guy was explaining it, as he was walking us through the scenario, you find yourself kind of envisioning what he's seeing. And I really just like that, because at this level in the office, I don't get to do that much anymore. So when they're telling the story, it kind of not only brings you back, but puts you, and you empathize and you put yourself in there, and you think, because if you've been on enough fires, you're seeing what he's seeing, the size up, the arrival conditions, pulling this, doing that. So I love the idea that they're creating a story that you can follow along. Plus, their lessons learned, whether good or bad. And I dig that too. I think that a lot of times, whether it's a class or whatever, sometimes we tend to avoid, for whatever reason, the negatives and whatever. And those little nuggets, those little lessons are the I should have, or this happened and I would have do it differently next time. Those are so valuable, man. And especially when it comes to search, man, those little nuggets, when somebody says, I should have did this, that's gold right there, man. So
yeah.
Anyway.
And firemen, we got an ego. Everybody freaking knows that, right? So we tend to tell a story in a way that makes us look good. And really the point of that is, hey man, just be humble and like share, because if you miss something, chances are I probably missed something too. And so as we started putting those together, really the intent was to recreate what we heard on the Grabs podcast when we were doing our search scenarios. So we could take, hey, episode 125, we do that as part of the search scenario, and then we directed people back to, hey, listen to this happened for real. And that was pretty cool. Larry McCormick, I talk about him a lot. I learned so much from him, but he tells a story about going in and he found a victim leaning over a bathtub, and her butt's up in the air. He gets her, and a little bit of a chuckle. He gets her. He starts to drag her out, and he never checks under the victim, and she was covering up her son, right? So another truck captain or a truck lieutenant happened to end up coming in after and got the son, but that sticks with me. And I use that in every time we do search training. There's going to be a big victim covering up a little victim in a bathtub. And time the people miss it, and I turn them back to that podcast and Larry's story. And it's like, ooh, and they never forget that, so that we don't have to make the same mistakes. Right. But I mean, we're not giving out hero awards on this podcast. We're just trying to learn. We're just trying to learn from each other and find out, is what we're hearing in the firefighter rescue survey happening? And sure as heck, I mean, these are grabs where they find one, they find more. They're getting victims out in 2 to 4 minutes. I wish I would have. This happened, and no, I just grabbed them. I didn't use any like webbing, and it's like, okay, it's all backing up what we're teaching. So I think that's what's important.
And there's such validity from those stories. Like when you're creating those scenarios, the validity of each one. I mean, it speaks for itself, man. That's cat's ass. That's awesome, man. So this is where I want to spend a little time on. So what does a search culture need from the top down? And what I mean by that is, let's take it from the top down, from the fire chief down to the firefighter. what does that need look like? In other words, I'm getting close to being a fire chief. I'm deputy chief. So from our level up here, what's needed?
Well, I think to start, and there is honor in being a back stepper for your entire career or being on the
100%.
rig. Believe me,
100%.
I if I could have just retired off of the rig, running calls and hanging with the guys and cooking and watching movies and just being dirty, I would do that. But that's not how we change culture, right? So we need dudes to step up and do the uncomfortable. Like, we're sitting in offices, we'd much rather be in the bay doing stuff. So, but that bears a responsibility. But to promote, but man, when you do promote, there's something with your bugles that you can be like, hey, this is what we're going to do. So changing, number one, like just changing expectations. In my class, I hit, it's like, what is a barrier to you going in and doing a search? And not having that expectation, that's a big thing. So as fire chiefs, as ops chief, I can say there will be a primary search done in the first 10 minutes of every structure fire, period. And if there's not, the battalion chief will be in my office explaining why. Now, there can be reasons why, but a lot of people are just motivated. They don't want to be in the chief's office. So simply by saying that, we change the expectation. We put expect fire, expect victims signs up when you're walking out into the bays. But that's kind of setting it up. But then we need to give them SOGs that back it up. We need to give them the right training. If a guy doesn't know when he's supposed to use VES and when he's not, we're failing as chiefs to define that. And maybe we're not the guys to teach it. There's a million people out there that can teach this stuff well. But we need to put it into a system for them that makes sense. And then I think when we get them on the street, you guys are doing 10 weeks and we're doing 6 to 8 weeks of new hires. You need to spend a good week on the searching, and you need to have the line guy showing them how to do the search. And teaching it is a pretty big deal, because we've all done it, and we'll take pieces here and pieces there and we'll put it all together. But I've done Fort Lauderdale Fire Expo with you guys, Orlando, and I've been grateful to learn from so many good instructors to say you really need to put a system together. I was teaching my daughter's 15, and like last month I was teaching her how to drive a car. And like, I'm gonna teach you everything, so you're gonna do it right. And we're gonna get in the car, the seatbelt, and then you're gonna check all your mirrors, and it's gonna be good. And like, all right, we're gonna do a left-hand turn. So you're gonna identify a turn, you're gonna look next to you, you're gonna check your blind spot, you're checking your mirror, your turn signal, and you go. And I forgot I didn't teach the poor girl how to turn the car or brake and gas. Sometimes we throw too much on. So I saw search culture. Justin McWilliams does it. Like, when they bring recruits in, they just have a bedroom. Like, we're going to teach you how to search a bedroom. Before we teach you the context of how it all goes together, we're going to teach you that you're going to search with your hands. You're going to go to the bed first. You're going to sweep. You're not going to pat. You're going to check for bunk beds. You're going to check around the bed, under the window and the door, and then you're going to come back out. And start with the little things. It drives me nuts when you hear people, like, we did a search class and like they blacked us out and we did it. Like, did they show you how to do a good one first? Like, show you, explain it, show you, let you ask questions, then do it, and just helmet, pants, and gloves, because that's going to bring up either some questions that you didn't answer, or it's going to highlight some stuff you missed. And slowly crawl, walk, run. And then when you're going to do a scenario, make the scenario like mirror firefighter rescue survey. 4 to 6 minutes. Instead of either you were good or you're bad, you're fast or you're slow. It should be, you called out. Did you listen? You called out. Did you hear somebody answer you? No. All right. If you call out, you got to listen. When you find a victim, when you find one, you got to look for another one. Put the second victim there, so that way you can measure to see if they actually listened to what you taught. Put a victim in a window or in a room with no smoke. We find a victim, we're like, oh crap, it's a victim. We're going to drag them out the way we came. We're like, did you realize you came from a hot, crappy environment to a very clean environment? Like, you didn't even look at the conditions to say, maybe we should protect in place or get them out the window. So being very deliberate with your drills and how you teach the search. And like, I think as chiefs, we need to build training facilities that match what we're searching. And so that was the first thing that was given to me when I got promoted is like, hey, you're going to have a training facility. What do you want to do? And we built a mobile home, a 1-story, a 2-story, and a multifamily. And then we threw in some Connex containers so that we could do, a T-prop. And if we get good at training there and we get good at searching there, we're establishing that muscle memory. So at Chiefs, you got, and even if it's not building a facility, find some acquireds to let your guys get in and train. And then we need to celebrate our wins. I think when the crews are getting in, and we're not going to grab a victim on every fire, but what we've found some success with is after a fire, we just take the iPhone and we just got a stupid Bluetooth microphone that we could put on the first due officer, and we just say, hey, while we're here, before we completely break down, walk me through what you had. And it's a quick 5-minute video that, hey, we arrived on scene. You see where the engine's parked. This is what we saw when we arrived on scene. We stretched to here. We have them walk through the house. And the really cool part is you're hearing that story firsthand before it gets a chance to change as they talk with more and more people. The cool part is you're going through and you've got like burned out areas of the house, but when you find a bedroom that's virtually untouched, if there was a victim in there, you would have found them. So the only thing missing from that search is the victim. So that's how we celebrate some wins. They're like, man, I saw the pre-arrival video and you found 2 untouched rooms. Like, that's as good as a grab to me.
So that you said a lot there, man. And as you started this conversation, when you were talking about like the chiefs and the fire chiefs setting the expectations, immediately I thought of, did you see the post recently from Shannon Stone after he got,
yeah.
Dude, I was reading through that, and if you haven't seen it, everybody, if you know Shannon Stone, he just got promoted to fire chief, and during his ceremony, he basically laid out expectations, and they're just powerful, and kind of the things we're talking about here in terms of, I'm looking at it right now actually on Facebook, and we're going to continue to embrace the importance of being good at every single thing we do. Masking up quick is important. Stretching to the door quick and efficient 100% of the time is important. Being a really good paramedic, not a really great paramedic, not a good paramedic is important. Things like that. But just to your point, he's telling everybody flat out, here's the expectation. Here's the standard. And that's powerful, man, coming from the top down.
For sure.
So that's where my mind went when you said set expectations in terms of our roles now as chief officers at this level. And then in terms of the training, that's so important. And I think about this all the time. The example you just gave of show them what it looks like, show them what a good search looks like, so they know exactly what it's so basic, but sometimes it's not part of the program, and that's a little frustrating. So you're 100% right on that.
Before we hop on from that, what we found, like if we're going to hire like 6 or 8 folks, right? The easiest thing to do as instructors is to team them up, and one's going to be the boss and one's going to be the firefighter. But as soon as they get on the road, that's not their role. So while it takes more reps, we try to put an existing guy or instructor as the officer. That way they know you're going to be talked to like the officer is going to talk to you. They're going to dump you in rooms the way you're going to be dumped in rooms, and you're going to know just that role. You don't need to know how to lead the search as the boss. Not in your first, couple weeks. You just need to know how to be a good soldier, right?
Yeah.
And so we can't get instructor boredom or say, hey, we're going to move through these 6 scenarios a little faster because we'll just team you up. That's being lazy. We got to do it the right way.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Last thing you said about the post-fire little video recording, I think that's powerful for a couple ways. I know we talked about it before, but if I'm on scene and that becomes the norm, the standard, and I know that if I'm first in, at the end of when everything's calmed down, when we've done our hot wash, when we're starting to pack up, I know that I'm going to have to do a recording based on my findings. I'm pretty sure that's going to kind of tweak me to make sure that I do it right from the beginning, if that's the standard that's being set. So that's a great practice to have.
And it's not meant to burn anybody, but we want people to come humble, to say, look,
right,
just right from the get, you're showing me the building. And if you say, oh, it was fully involved, the smoke was to the floor, and then we see that there was like smoke stains like only 3 feet off the ceiling. We're like, man, this guy's full of crap, right? So we just don't make up the story. Say how it is, and if you make a mistake, just say it right there. And so we try to get that story right from the beginning. It's not meant to punish anybody, but it also finds gaps in where we're at. And I'm never out there to make anybody look stupid, but we got to say what we do and we say what we can get better at.
Hmm. No, and it teaches humility too. If you have a respected officer getting on that little video clip and not only telling people what they did right, what he or she did right, but also saying, you know what, I should have did this. Well, that gives permission to everybody in the organization to go, well, if he or she said that, I can do that too. I can be humble and show a little lack of hubris as well. So there's so many things that are transcend that one example you gave, man. So when both of us, we teach a lot, but when I present on leadership, one of the things I often ask the audience in terms of like, let's say the traits of leadership, but when we talk about that, where does your mind go in terms of like, and I'm switching gears a little bit, but in terms of us being leaders in the fire service, when we think about traits, what are some things that speak to you?
Servant leadership, number one. And I think Shannon Stone hits that quite a bit, but we exist for them. And I mean, we say that like the fire service exists for the civilian, but admin exists to serve our firefighters. And our responsibility is to give them a paycheck, train them to be good, and give them the tools that they need to do their job, and then to celebrate them. And so I really believe that that's the case. I feel like, being 100% transparent, like there's some times where I struggle with that and I get the me. If I don't get a workout for the day, all of a sudden my brain's like, man, I'll cut lunch short and I'm going to try to get a workout at lunch. And then somebody comes to me and they're like, hey, Chief, I need this. And it's like, oh, you're screwing up my lunch. Like, that's not the position I want to be in. So something I learned from Chief Stone is like, he starts out the day with a workout, and that's the expectation. Like, I'm going to be at the admin gym and I'm going to be there for the first hour of the day. And if you need something, get a hold of me. If not, I'm starting out the day, because then the rest of I set the day for me, and then the rest of the day I got for everybody else. And I noticed that with me. It's like the two things I do. I read the Bible in the morning, and I try to exercise. And when I do both of those things every day, man, it's a great day. Today I read the Bible. I didn't get a workout in. They went a little sideways, but keeps things in perspective. That's a great way to
start the day. That's a great way to start the day. Well, good. I think that concept is definitely something that's in the forefront of a lot of leaders out there. And even as I'm doing my research right now for my EFO, it keeps coming up over and over again. So it's having me dive into what that concept of being a true servant leader is. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
I think the other thing that, we had talked today as an organization, and I think you're starting a new organization, so you don't have that issue. But, thinking back to Fort Lauderdale, man, the guys and gals that are coming up right now, we're training them right. They've got access to any mentor that they want. So they're really man, they're coming into the fire service at an awesome time. I think we need to celebrate that. But where some organizations struggle is the crews, the members of the department that have 5 or 10 years left, whether they feel intimidated or they feel like these young people are going to come up and, take their spot. Man, we need to change that mindset. Did you play, when you were younger, did you ever play King of the Hill?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so you get up to the top and you're knocking everybody down. And I'd really love to change that mentality that when we get up to the top of the hill, we need to be pulling everybody else up. So a fun exercise I just did today was I took our organizational, where everybody's listed in every position, at every station, and I took out everybody. I deleted everybody that's not going to be here 10 years from now. And man, like my eyes just lit up. I was like, wow, these young folks, this is their department. So let's take the next 5 or 10 years and say, what do we need to do for those people so that they're prepared for this to be their department? And that doesn't mean we teach them the bad traits. That doesn't mean, well, kid, you'll get it your turn at the top of the mountain when it's your turn. Man, let's pour into them right now. And man, that was cool. So I challenge anybody, look at the organization, take out the next 10 years, and then see who you should be pouring into.
Man, that's a great way to look at things. In fact, that kind of brings me to my next question, which I think It's somewhat in the same terms, but you may answer it differently. But in terms of when you think about the fire service as a whole, do you have any concerns? Like, is there anything that keeps you up at night these days in terms of the fire service?
Kind of what we just hit. Some of the
Yeah.
negativity at the top. We were up at the firemanship up, and we were training in Carroll Stream, and man, what a great organization! Just outside of Chicago, so much history. Like they just have it. The fire service seems to run thick. Like you walk in there, like, man, this is awesome. Asking some of them, hey, when did it flip? And they said, we just needed a few retirements. And you're into leadership. I'm into leadership. I don't know that any leader can come in and fix what's been brewing for 20 years. Sometimes we just got to let it go, focus on the people that are going to be taking over the organization and really embrace them. And so it's the bosses that stand in the way and say no or aren't bringing their people up. That annoys the crap out of me.
That's a profound thing. And then the last two comments we just got done talking about are probably things that we could talk another hour on, another 2 hours, a whole day on, in terms of like succession planning and setting these guys up for success. I wish those things happen more. And unfortunately, I think we've always struggled in the fire service with that concept of succession planning and preparing the next generation. But at least we're talking about it, and that's a good thing. The more we talk about it, the more we put it out there and take it from the ether and put it out there on Front Street more, and the more we practice it, everything we're talking about right now, and practicing and put that into what we do is so critical, man. But yeah, you're right. At some point after, it's like, where do you put your energy into? And I think you just kind of alluded to that. You got these guys that have the groundwork in place. They have the mentors around them. Where do you appropriately divide all your energy to make sure not only your agency is maintained, but then you're succeeding and putting the right people in the right place? All right, man. Well, listen, we've talked about a lot, and I want to value your time. And I think that this is where I wanted this whole talk to go, man. I'm just looking through the notes right here, and I take a decent amount of notes every time, and I always write them in cursive because Nick Papa was writing in cursive to me next to me one day, and I'm like, what are you writing in cursive? And I, for some reason, just started doing that across the board since I saw him doing that. So I always give him credit for that. But this is where I wanted to see this going. In terms of the person listening to this podcast, I think that there's a lot that we dove into in terms of search, not only on a small granular level, but more so just overall, the 30,000 foot view, wherever you want to talk about. And I love that we started with the fact that the people coming to your classes, I think you said 50% of them said the same thing. When they found a victim, they didn't expect it. That's a profound, profound statement. And it has to go back to mindset. In other words, when you're assigned to search, or you're going to structure fire, are you in your mind thinking there's going to be a victim? When I find them, what am I going to do? Or whatever. So I think that switch in mindset was powerful. You mentioned system a few times, and I like that you did that, because when I think about building this department and the standards we're going to set and the expectations, then the systems we will put into place, whether it's pulling a line, putting the fire out, search and rescue, VES, whatever, is a system in place to where it's done routinely. It's the norm. It's the standard. So I think about that a lot. I like that we talked about the Gravis podcast, and if you haven't listened to the Gravis podcast, you need to. It's full of just chocked with good information. It's short, sweet, to the point, and it's good tactical information that puts into play everything you may be reading or seeing in the Firefighter Rescue Survey or all the data that's out there. People are doing it every day in the fire service, and it gets a front row seat to their experiences. And it's the good, the bad, the ugly, everything. And that's powerful stuff. I'm glad we talked about the needs from the top down, and from the fire chief, from our position, the fact that we need to be setting expectations, making statements like expect victims instead of just, do a search pattern, And oddly, my mind goes to something that Nick Esposito told me once. He's like, instead of like, he never says park the truck. He's like, position the apparatus. Don't just park. If you go to Publix, don't park the truck. Position the apparatus for response. Totally different mindsets than the way you're doing things. So in terms of like expecting victims, not just do a search, but the mindset of when you get somebody, what are you going to do? So that's powerful. And then a lot of the things you talked about in terms of servant leadership, which is a whole other topic for another day. But the fact that there's a lot to existing for them, existing for our firefighters, and then at our level, setting that up for them so they can do what they're doing, so they can be the firefighter that they're supposed to be, that they can do their job without having to micromanage or whatever. So, man,
to that point, Steve, I mean, you've been a go-getter like your whole career. And what are the things that the Chiefs did that made you better? It's like supporting the Fort Lauderdale Fire Expo, letting you guys teach, letting you guys pick a Halligan, a Pro Bar over a 3-piece. Mm-hmm. Those are decisions that we don't, at our level, we don't need to make. We can let our guys make it. We will double check because we're into the job that they're making adequate, good decisions. But you think about all the people that just turn that over to you. Firefighters are problem solvers. Let's turn over our problems to them and let them figure it out.
It's the truth, man. It is the absolute truth. And at this level, that feeling of empowerment, to your point, that I'm thinking 20 years ago when I was asked to do something, work on a committee, look at this piece of equipment. What are your thoughts on this, Steve? When a chief level officer looks at a 1 or 2 year firefighter and goes, "Hey, tell me your thoughts on this." Whoa, just that feeling of, oh my God, they value my opinion. That's incomparable, man. It's a good feeling. So yes, 100% on that. So what's next for you, man? What's on your radar these days? What else? Where are we going to see you next?
Shoot. I don't know. Hopefully FDIC. I know they're together picking out classes and stuff. Yeah. So we've got that. I'm in the FSRI study that's going to be going on. We're going to be doing the first meeting. I think it's in September. So that's kind of coming up, but not a ton.
For the FSRI, what are you going to be specifically going through and looking at?
I'm not real sure yet, but I know it's multifamilies. And I think as it came out, it was more row homes, and like, man, we don't have any row homes. But then starting to look at definitions, it's like the multifamily, and we got a lot of college housing in there, so that really fits into that. So we haven't gotten into exactly what all we're covering quite yet, but it should be fun. I'm excited.
Yeah, I will tell you the last thing I'm thinking about, and the last thing I'll say is, and I don't remember exactly the wording he put it, but I know that Rhodes was talking during his FDIC presentation, and he was talking about the acronyms, the NFPA, and all these other organizations, and how there's the rogues that are out there, all the people that are really into the job, and how they need to be some sort of convergence between the two. Like those that are passionate and want to do things, that's great, but they need to infiltrate and be part of all these bigger organizations so that they could see what really needs to be done out there, whether it's NFPA or whatever. And I think that was powerful. So when guys like you are contributing to those organizations and that studies and stuff, man, that just brings the validity down to a tactical level that we can all understand. And we know that people who are over there, whether it's you or whoever else that are out there, they're in it, are giving us good information. That's good stuff, man.
Yeah. And you can probably echo to this point. Once you hit a level at the organization, the traveling around and teaching, while fun, and it refills my passion bucket. I want my guys to get the first fruits of me. So we're going to do everything we can in my organization, in my area, and then really just try to bring other people to our area. As much as I like to go out, and nobody really likes a chief that gets promoted and is on the road all the time, traveling, teaching someplace else. So,
no, you got to bring it back home, man. That's what we're sending people out there for, to be messengers, but then to bring it back home to make sure their own departments are better. Home is better,
That's it.
All right. Well, listen, we're going to start wrapping this up, and as always, for the listener, we thank you for listening. We strive to here at the podcast to do as much as we can to make this as tactically deployable as possible. Taking that concept, whatever it is, and really making it not only understandable, but how do I deploy it now? Like, what do I do from this point going forward? And I think this was chock full of them. So thanks again for joining me, Grant. I appreciate it. Any final words?
If I can be of any help to anybody, we've got some SOGs, we've got a good department manual we've put together. Just reach out to me, grantschwalbe@gmail.com, and I'll share everything that I've got, because so many others in the fire service have been open to share with me. So what we can all do together is far better than what any one of us can do by ourselves. So
perfect way to end this, man. All right. Well, thank you, Grant. Much appreciated. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you to FDIC, Fire Engineering, Diane, David, and all them cats. And again, thank you to my organization, to Donato, for letting me to do this. Second Friday of every month, we do this podcast. So thank you for listening. Hope you've learned something from this. Take care. Be safe. We'll see you next time.